That's right. It is not the podcast you were looking for, but the best one available when you were picking. I'm your host, Matt Minnick, as always, and today I am joined by Joe Goodberry from The Athletic. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing tremendous. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. And John Sheeran, the guy that, tell you what, Ian Rappaport better be watching his back as he's down there at the Senior Bowl. Breaking news, John Sheeran from Cincy Jungle. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, Matt.
All right, fantastic. So, we're going to be talking about the Senior Bowl today. Both these guys were down at the practices, so seeing a lot of things that most of us missed out on. Obviously, in the NFL, the biggest thing is the quarterback position. And this year, we have all been told what a weak class it is. And personally, I hate that kind of talk because nobody's out there trying to draft a class of quarterbacks. It's about finding the one guy who can be a franchise guy for your team. So this week, watching the practices and how these guys perform in the game, Joe, did you see a guy that you think could be a franchise guy in the NFL?
They all sucked this week, to be honest with you.
Yep.
It wasn't very interesting. It wasn't very fun. Honestly, you were looking for traits, and for the most part, because I think they struggled with what they showed on tape. And so let's take the best guy there from a tool standpoint was probably Drew Lock out of Missouri. But when you watch him on tape, he's extremely inconsistent in a lot of ways, and most of that stems from him getting pressured and not feeling comfortable with bodies around him. And then in practice, you could just see his live arm, but it was wild. And his decision-making at times and his pocket presence, even when they went in the team drills, it showed you everything he was. High ceiling, low floor, and that's who he is. And then Daniel Jones, who I felt comfortable with on tape, was a disaster during the week for the most part, especially in terms of handling the football. I thought he fumbled 3 under center and then came back and took 3 shotgun snaps to the face in one practice and fumbled all 3 of them. He struggled when he was asked to bootleg and find, basically a 2-man route, and he couldn't keep his vision as it looked like clear and steady, and he'd run into the pass rusher or throw it away. And I just thought he struggled a lot. He looked like his mind was racing. He had some of the best throws of all the practices, but yet he had a lot of throws that you could see his arm strength is adequate, but he doesn't put a lot of zip on it, and I think the windy days we had really took its toll on him. And then the other guy for me that is at least interesting is Will Grier out of West Virginia. And Grier on tape I find intriguing because he tries to do the things I think I want in a franchise quarterback, or at least the next era of franchise quarterback, and that's try to make plays when things break down, try to keep the play alive, try and push the ball downfield, and he does that. And at the same time, I don't think he's a great athlete, and I don't think he has a great arm. So I question, is he going to be limited by doing those things in the NFL? Are those things going to end up looking like Case Keenum doing them rather than Patrick Mahomes doing them? And I think that's a fair question and one that wasn't answered at the Senior Bowl. But I do think it was interesting that out of all the guys that were measured this past week, he threw for the most velocity. And I also wondered if he was putting more into it because he had more inaccurate passes than I'm used to seeing him throw with from a clean pocket. So I coming away from it, I don't think anyone should feel confident that that's your guy in the first round. I think it's just another piece to the puzzle. I don't think it should have answered it at all. It's not like last year when Baker Mayfield came in and he was okay, and you got to see his personality and swagger more than anything, and how infectious it was. I think that had value. But with these guys, at most, I came away thinking I like Locke's personality. I didn't like Jones' personality, and I didn't like any of them on the field.
Yeah, I think you definitely saw a lot of struggles in there. Will Grier, one of the things I really liked about him on film is I thought, even though he didn't have a huge arm, I thought his placement was really good on his deep balls, and he did not have that at all from what I saw this week. So I think you make a good point. I mean, is he trying to push it too much, and that's taken away his deep ball accuracy and placement? I don't know, but I was a little disappointed by it, but also kind of like, okay, great, maybe he'll slip a little bit lower, where you don't have to blow a first rounder on him too. But John, same thing to you. How'd you feel about the quarterbacks this week?
Yeah, the main thing that stuck out with me at the end of the week was that you saw from a bunch of different outlets a lot of controversial opinions about who had the best week. like you had like Emery Hunt saying that Tyree Jackson was like the best, most consistent. You had Eric Galco praise Trace McSorley, and then you had like a bunch of guys from the Draft Network say it was Drew Lock. You had opinions going all over the place, and I think that to me basically says that no one really stood out and really separated them from the pack. And I think the consensus would be Drew Lock, just because, like Joe said, those flashy, high velocity throws, those darts, those effortless throws that he can make. Those were definitely on display. But again, a lot of the inconsistencies were also on display. And the great thing about this is that you get to see these guys and these types of drills, these one-on-one situations where they're trying to improve on things that they aren't very good at. And I don't think that we had a lot of questions on these guys' films that were answered during this week, and I think that doesn't bode well for any of them. And I think for me especially, I think I was most disappointed in Will Grier, and like I only saw like a chunk of him in the first couple of days when the weather wasn't that good. That may have been like a factor with that, but like Joe said, I do think that he came in thinking that maybe his arm wasn't as highly talented as a Drew Lock or even a Daniel Jones in that case, and I think he was putting a little bit too much on it and sacrificing his accuracy in the process. So, like again, there was not a Baker Mayfield down at the Senior Bowl this year. There was not a clear consensus first round guy, and with that in mind, I wouldn't feel comfortable investing in a high round draft pick in any of these guys because the Senior Bowl practices are just one thing, but their films all had major question marks, and their productions are all, for the most part, very questionable, and they didn't really do anything, in the game or in the practices to really erase any of that doubt. So you came away with it with a lot more questions than answers. That's never really a good thing.
So GM John Sheeran is very glad that Dwayne Haskins came out early because that's about the only one you're feeling good about in the first round, I'd say. So. All right. So moving on, I think a position that really did stand out was the wide receiver group. Particularly, there was a ton of slot receivers, really talented slot receivers. Deebo Samuel, Penny Hart, Andy Isabella, Hunter Renfrow. Were some guys that definitely really stuck out in that group. John, not just the slots, but what did you think about the receiver group as a whole?
The McLaurin dude from Ohio State. Me and Joe were talking to Josh Norris on like the first day, and the first thing he talked about was that he loved playing special teams, and like they were doing like special teams drills, and like no like he was just the best gunner down there by far, and no one was able to touch him. And then when he was running routes and stuff, he was clearly separating in and out of his breaks, looking very fluid with his lower half and all that stuff, and looked like he had natural hands. So I know he was a high touchdown guy at Ohio State, but that was primarily it. He didn't have a lot of yardage to tack onto that, but I think he looked really good, and I think he's going to be a definite immediate contributor in the rookie year. I don't know where he's going to get drafted though, but Penny Hart as a guy that you said, like there's a lot of hype with Andy Isabella coming into this week, and Isabella in my opinion kind of struggled early on. A lot of wasted and extra movement in some of the short routes that were just extremely consistent, and you think that after seeing them a couple times, maybe it was just a bad rep or whatever, but they kept popping up. And when you compare him to Penny Hart and how effortlessly he looked in his routes and in his cuts and his breaks, it was just night and day difference, and honestly reminded me of a Taylor Gabriel or an Andrew Hawkins type guy. So I definitely think that in this group, and there was another guy from it was a small school, Fulgham, I think was his last name, but he really showed out on the last day of practice on day 3 and some of those red zone drills and high pointing the ball. So I definitely think there's a lot of bodies in the senior crop of receivers that will get drafted and will be guys that you want to activate on the roster, whether in special teams or just have that third or fourth or fifth guy on your depth chart to eventually get some minimal targets during the game.
Yeah, I think I'm really surprised that Isabellaing hasn't become a thing on the internet. People just putting up videos of themselves doing regular everyday things, but taking way too many steps to do it. But I definitely think he's got some talent, and we'll see what that looks like in live action too. So, Joe, same question over to you. What did you think of the receiver group?
I liked it, and I thought I was going to like this group anyways. And I just looking at this class as a whole. Especially wide receivers, it's going to be a strong group. And thinking of the Bengals especially, if they want like a fourth guy or even a guy that could be a third or developmental guy, I think rounds 2 through 5 this year are going to yield a few gems that are going to end up being good quality starters down the line. And there was a few guys in practices that could continue to stand out, I thought, and then to bring it into the game Saturday, the first guy I have is Gary Jennings from West Virginia. He's a 6'1", 210 guy. He won deep almost every single time. He was the most consistent deep threat in all the practices we watched. I didn't think anybody could keep up with him, but then he had a couple of really nice red zone, slant routes, fade routes, kind of jerk route where he's getting guys. He was quick, and I'm interested to go back and see more of him because I watched Will Grier, and I thought he had a lot of good receivers, but I did not isolate Jennings at all in thinking he was anything more than just a rotational player. But all week through practices, and then he scored on that slant from Tyree Jackson. He had a good week, and that's someone I want to go back and watch. The other guy for me that looked the part but could never get consistent passes was Tyree Brady from Marshall, and he's 6'2", 206. He's got 10-inch hands, and you see those big mitts, man, when he goes up and he can contort his body in the air and go after difficult catches, and he needs to consistently. I think we were standing next to Matt Waldman when we were talking about him, and Waldman says he's seen his tape already, and he gets bad balls all the time. And it was funny because in practice, that's what I noted, is that he continues to get poor passes. Now, is that a product of him being in the wrong place at the wrong time for a receiver that's crucial? And if it is, that would be a reason why he's not higher on many people's boards. But he's got natural talent, natural ability. You can see the way he moves, the way he runs. His cuts are deliberate. His feet plant and he moves. Good ball skills, can make that hard grab. I would just like to go back and see and watch his route running in detail, and that's what I think the Senior Bowl is for anyways. Let these guys stand out to me, and I'm going to go back to the tape and try and verify or answer some questions. The other guy for me was Tyree Jackson's receiver was Anthony Johnson from Buffalo. In practices, a lot of out-breaking routes. I think he'd be good in the slot. I think he has good hands. He's a physical receiver, uses his hands well in his route running, so he's going to create separation that way. He doesn't have the top-end speed. He's probably going to run in the mid-4.5s. And that's fine if he's probably a 4th, 5th round guy anyways, but this class is going to have a bunch of people, and I think a lot of them were at the Senior Bowl that are going to be someone's favorite for the mid-round pick.
Travis Fulgham was the guy that I was thinking of. He's went to Old Dominion, and he had a teammate down there, which I definitely think we should talk about later.
Yeah, I definitely see what you guys are talking about with that. I think that something that concerns me about Will Grier is I noticed this week it seemed like whenever he did something good, he was thrown to either Jennings or Stills. It really makes you want to kind of go back and, Joe, you pointed out he had some good receivers. It's like, how good were his receivers? Was that really helping him out quite a bit on film? And I definitely agree with Johnson as well. I think Johnson's a really talented receiver. He could be a gem. But any Bengals fans, and I would think there'd be more than a few Bengals fans listening to this, are probably going to be like, "Hey, Auden Tate's our 4th receiver," but we're all set. But anyway, moving on. The other thing we talked about a few now smaller school guys who kind of stood out. Particularly in that receiver group, there were a few. I think on the other side, in the defensive backs, there were a couple as well. I've had Corey Ballantyne from Washburn look really good. He's definitely a guy that showed that he can compete at that level, that he deserves to be there. Jordan Brown from South Dakota State, who will actually be appearing on this podcast on the next episode, thought we saw some good things out of him as well during the week. Had some issues in the game. I believe gave up 2 touchdowns in the game. What did you think, Joe, overall of the defensive back group?
I think they lost most of their reps to the receivers in one-on-one drills. I think it was weird how they wanted to bring some of the safeties down to cover slot receivers, and in practices it didn't look good. Nasir Adderley was a guy that a lot of people said as a safety has the athleticism to come down and cover slot guys. And, man, Penny Hart tore him up a few times, and of course, because that type of athlete against a safety should happen. But I thought Adderley was much better when he was back at safety. The one corner I really circled a few times because he kept popping out was Lonnie Johnson from Kentucky, and he's 6'2", 210, and you could see how long and strong he was. When he was in press coverage, especially in practices, he was moving receivers, and then they tried these inside breaking routes on him, whether it be a slant or whatever, and as he's attacking the ball, you can see how he bumps into receivers, and they are being moved in the air or even while running, and his size and strength was definitely viewable from the tape. He only had one interception in college, so we didn't get too many opportunities to see his ball skills and see how he would transition as a guy, maybe being a man cover corner that is going to have to turn his back to the ball and look for it. So we didn't get those opportunities. He's probably a zone guy that's going to come up and make some tackles. And there was somebody else here that I've got circled on my notes as I'm going through it that I'm looking for, and I want to say his last name is Moreland or something along those lines. He was the only guy that could cover in the slot. Now I'm looking for his name and I can't find him.
All right, let's swing back around to you. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. Ballantyne really stuck out to me on the first day, and as a guy who went to Washburn, I don't even know where Washburn is. I think it's somewhere in the Midwest, but it's a really, really small school. I always like to see how those small school guys kind of fare up against, guys who play in the Power 5 and just kind of measuring not only their athleticism, but just how physical they are when they first play against them. And Ballantyne was a guy to me that didn't kind of back down to that challenge. And when he was going up in one-on-ones, bump and run, man coverage, his hands were feeling the routes, and he had a good sense of when the ball was going to come in. And he played the ball pretty well. And sometimes he got a little bit too grabby, but in the NFL, they're not always going to call that. So I think he showed, good proficiency in his hands and his feet, and I think his athleticism was fine. When that's the second day of practice when they had it indoors, we got to see some of the cool angles from the film room. We got to see some angles of him in one-on-ones as well when he was playing a little bit off, and he looked a little bit more uncomfortable there. But but his recovery and reading routes and finding his way back to the ball, I think that was also impressive. So definitely for a guy who didn't have a lot of experience playing against Power 5 competition, I think he looked really well. Rocky Sin was obviously the most well-known defensive back out of this group, I guess, from Temple, obviously with the name, but I think he had a good shrine rate, and he's probably going to be like a top 150 pick or whatever. I think he also looked pretty good in backpedaling and just finding the ball. I think his press needs a little bit more work, and I think his hands need a little bit more work, but I like the base that he has, especially as an athlete and as a guy that you can trust in man-to-man coverage. So I think the defensive back group was pretty good, pretty solid, but like Joe said, they had a lot of safeties coming down, specifically Adderley, and I'm not sure what the reason for that was, but I do like Adderley. I'm not sure he's a first-round guy, but I think there's a lot of guys with good bases that you can kind of build up and potentially groom into future starters.
I got the name of the guy.
What you got?
You want it? Jimmy Moreland. So it was Moreland out of James Madison. Okay. He's 5'10", 175. He had 18 interceptions in college as a 4-year starter. So
that's a lot.
And he was the only guy I thought covered well in the slot. And that's someone I'd like to get if we can find any tape on James Madison college. That would be awesome. But, we might have to go off hearsay on that one. But just stats and the way he played this week, I'm at least interested.
It's particularly interesting to have 18 interceptions against James Madison because you got to figure the guy who's, the corner on the other side isn't nearly as talented. Right. You got a corner that good. They're probably not taking that many shots at him. He was still able to pull that off. A couple of guys I'll add to that. He had some hits and misses. I actually thought Isaiah Johnson from Houston, I thought he moved a lot better than I thought he would at his size at 6'3", I believe. People have suggested him moving into safety. I think that could be an interesting move for him. But I think he's got some pretty good skills, and he's not as stiff as I thought he would be at that size. And the one guy that really stood out to me I thought was really good was Amon Marshall from USC. I thought he did some really good things, both in the game and in one-on-ones in practice. He stood out to me. A guy that, really seemed to be well coached. I know he made a great play on a fade ball in one-on-ones during the week, and then as it came into the game, you could see him covering the same way, leaning on the receiver, taking away any kind of throwing lane they had. So I thought Amon Marshall was a Yep. Yeah.
They were all big.
It was interesting.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it creates a really interesting matchup in those one-on-one drills when you've got so many talented, under 6 foot receivers, and then you got these big corners out there. So definitely, that's the other thing too is I thought sometimes they weren't they didn't have the matchups they should have had. And you pointed out with the safeties. I think it was that early. I noticed, he was having a tough time, and then all of a sudden they put him on a tight end, and it's like, okay, there it is.
Right.
That's what he should be doing. So, all right. So, Joe, any other offensive skill players, running backs, tight ends that stood out to you?
Yeah, I didn't focus on running backs and tight ends mostly. I wanted to watch tight ends more, but, when they split up in the practices, you kind of got to go with the O-line, D-line, or receivers and corner one-on-ones, and that's where we seem to gravitate. So a lot of times in the middle of the field, it was linebackers versus running backs, tight ends, blitz pickup, things like that, or in coverage. And I didn't get a chance to focus on them. But in team drills, in 11-11, even 7-on-7, we got to see a few guys and some guys that I wrote down. Running back, Wes Hills, and I'm trying to think of where he's from now.
Slippery Rock?
Written down. Yeah, Slippery Rock. Yes, he has the big green S on his helmet. But he caught the ball really well, and he moved really well. He had one long run in the first drive, maybe the second drive of the game that I thought, okay, there's, I wanted to see him running as good as I thought he looked as an athlete. So that was a small school guy. And then the only tight end that I really thought moved well and caught the ball well was Josh Oliver out of San Jose State. He's got 10 and 5/8 inch hands, and he's 6'5" or 6'4.5" and 246. I thought he was the most athletic guy there, most sudden, best in his routes. And with hands like that, he made a couple catches too that stood out to me. The other guys both flashed as blockers, 88 and 89 for the same team, which was I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong team there. Let me flip my sheet. 88-89 was Drew Sample and Tommy Sweeney, Washington and Boston College. So they both had gold helmets, and I probably more than likely confused them on many plays, but they both blocked well.
Yeah, anybody from Boston College better be used to run blocking. We're doing quite a bit of that this year, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get into the O-line as well. But yeah, I think running back in particular is a position where you don't see a lot at these games because there's so much film on these guys already. And that's where your eyes go when when the casual fan is watching on Saturday anyway. So we kind of know a lot about the running backs going in. But when we see those smaller guys, it's great to see that they can do some things against higher level competition. I'm sure the blitz pickup part of it, that we get to see a little bit of it, but from the mental standpoint, how much they're really understanding it, that's probably a big part too. We all know how much NFL coaches love to talk about blitz pickups. So
for sure. One guy that stood out during the game though was Tony Pollard from Memphis, and I think he caught 48 balls in college, and I thought he ran well too during the game. So it's interesting that he's a dual threat guy that probably is a mid rounder to later. Someone I'm planning on going back to watch.
All right. So John, how about you? Any linebackers that stood out to you this week?
All right, so my favorite linebacker was Jermaine Pratt. He's 6'3", 240 out of North Carolina State. I'm not sure how he's going to test, but I know that he was extremely productive at North Carolina State when you're talking about solo tackles. But just when you watched on a lot of those team drills, and I think he was with John Gruden's team, so they ran a lot of out of the I formation, a lot of misdirection, a lot of counters, a lot of things going back and forth, and And when you have a linebacker that kind of doesn't have the instincts that you want from that Mike position, he can get lost in all the flow and end up on the wrong side of the play. But Pratt was kind of all over the place, and he was always in the right position. I think he has good trust in his eyes, and he was able to utilize that athleticism to either scrape over the top or shoot the gap where the point of attack was going to be. And I think he ended up making a lot of stops for, I believe he was on the South team, or North South, whatever. But he looked extremely well. He looked extremely instinctive, and just getting into his run fits and making physical stops. Obviously, they weren't always in pads, but he was always ready to make the play. And I think he had, in the game when they were in full pads, I think he should pop in his pads that actually makes some significant stops. So I think out of all the true Mike linebackers, Pratt looked the best to me. There's another guy at Notre Dame, Drew Tranquil, who kind of showed that same kind of instincts, same kind of play speed that really helped him get into position to make some plays. I thought he had a little bit of trouble getting off blocks when you had some of those good guards from the North squad get to the second level, but both those guys, Pratt and Tranquil, looked really instinctive and were always in position to let their athleticism kind of take them where they need to go to make those plays.
Yeah, well, as people that are writing on the Bengals, we're all paying attention to linebackers quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
They're going to be needing 2 or 3 new ones depending on how you look at it. But Joe, what do you think of that group?
Well, Pratt, I want to add two more things. He was calling the huddle for the defense when he was in there, so that's nice to know that he has that capability. Also, Pratt was tested as one of the fastest guys. I think it was the second day of practice.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful he tests very well when he shows up to the combine. Just seeing that was impressive. I think he reached 22 miles per hour, which is very fast for a linebacker. So if that's the case, he definitely flew around and was smacking helmets consistently, taking on fullbacks and dropping them. He was the one guy that consistently stood out for being physical also. And the other guy for me, and I like Drew Tranquill too, I thought same thing John felt, though, is that he maybe lost vision too often, chasing guys, chasing the backside blocker. They'd have, the tight end basically pulling to the other side on a counter play, and he'd chase that tight end every time and be out of position to make a play on the linebacker. The other guy that I was told to keep an eye on and watch, and I can only see clips, and he rarely caught my eye, but I thought he looked good when I did see him, was Terrell Hanks from New Mexico State, and he's 6'2", 230, but they say he's a good athlete and was highly productive. I haven't had a chance to go back and watch him, but it was someone that was mentioned to me a couple times during that week.
All right, John, you're a big O-line guy, so you're kind of moving down there. There were definitely a couple guys that stood out. I think you were actually the one that tweeted the video of Garrett Bradbury with the ridiculous reach on a 3 technique. Who are some guys that stood out to you that position? Guys that you think could be plug and plays for a team that drafts them.
Bradbury had a good week. I think he's not going to have the same upside as a guy like James Daniels. I think he's a couple years older and his frame's probably more maxed out than Daniels is. When you talk about the ability to just be immediately plugged into a ZBS and kind of build that wide zone running game around reaching those front side defensive tackles, Bradbury is the kind of guy that you would want next to him. There were a couple guys, a couple guards. Boston College's Chris Lindstorm was like a second-level magnet. Whether he was getting the backside guard or getting the mic, whenever he climbed to the second level, he would not only get the linebacker, but he would clear him out. And it reminded me of like the high points of Alex Redmond's tape. When he could identify his target in the second level, he would do very good in just clearing him out of the gap, and that's kind of what Lindstorm did all 3 days. And there was another guy from I also think that the Oklahoma guards that showed up were consistently better than the Wisconsin guards, not only in just moving guys at the point of attack on the ground game, but they're also more consistent in pass protection. And the Oklahoma offensive line did win the offensive line of the year, so it's good to see for them to show out. And from the tackles, I think I was kind of humbled a little bit because the tackles were like the one position that I did the majority of my pre-film work before going to the Senior Bowl. And I had guys like Chuma Edoga and Dalton Risner pegged as okay tackles, but they would probably be better moved into guard. But I think both of those guys showed a lot of competency in their footwork and their punches and just their overall ability to stifle bull rushes out on the exterior. And I think Edoga measured in less than 300 pounds, but he almost had 35-inch arms. So he's got the length, but he knows how to use the length. His punch timing is fine. His core strength looks okay. His footwork is outstanding. It's not at the Isaiah Wynn level that we saw last year, but I think it's good enough. And Risner's kind of the same way. He's the kind of guy that coaches would obviously love because he has the right mentality, he has the right attitude, he has the right overall display strength and the ability to finish. And I think you can play him all over the offensive line and he'd be really good. I think he'd still be better inside, but I do think that if a team wanted him at right tackle, he would probably succeed there. So, those guys will definitely require me to look back at the film and trying to correct the assumptions that they made going into this week, because I thought they were going to be inside guys, but maybe they can survive on the outside.
Yeah, I think you definitely hit on the big ones. Risner, Bradbury, Lindstrom. Those are the guys that really stood out to me. They were fortunate enough to be all right next to each other this week too, so that didn't hurt anything. Joe, what did you think of that group?
I thought they were really good, surprisingly good. I think Bradbury was the best guy there, but centers usually at best go, starting around pick 20. So I think Reisner could go before him. And Reisner had a good week and a good game, so maybe he should. And that position versatility, he's played center before, he's played guard, he's played tackle. He may not be your career franchise left tackle, but you're going to find a spot for him to play, and that's going to be appealing for a lot of teams. So I really like them. John also mentioned it, Chuma Edoga from Southern Cal. Again, long arms, 35-inch arms. I thought his hand placement was good. At 300 pounds, you want him to add some weight to his back end, and especially, for his lower body to anchor against bull rushes. But, that comes with time. The guy that stood out to me consistently, and I couldn't take my eyes off of him, was Nate Davis from Charlotte. And he's 6'3", 317. He played tackle. There's one game on YouTube you can watch full game against Tennessee where he has a fantastic. That was the first thing I watched when I was at the airport leaving. Nate Davis, he was the smallest, most compact guy. And I'm not saying he's short or light. His stance, man, when you could see him on the line, you instantly knew who he was. And no one out-leveraged him all week, except for Kalen Saunders, and we'll get to him because that's a stout defensive tackle right there. But him and Davis had some great battles back and forth. Otherwise, no one got below him. So his pad level was great. His strength was good. His thighs are tree trunks, and they just thundered every time he stepped. He was moving people, and not only just power. I thought when they ran zone stuff, he got to those reach blocks. He got to those linebackers, and he moved people. So Nate Davis is a guy that I came away with saying, man, is he a day two guard that's plug and play, and he played tackle, so you're going to have some catching up to do on the inside, but he's probably an impact player very early, or may end up being that for his career. So he's someone that I circled plenty of times. The other guy for me was Caleb McGarry from Washington. I thought he kind of had a lot of flash blocks where he would bury his guy or have good clean footwork or good hand usage, but it was disconnected. It was never two in a row, and it could, sometimes it'd be his hands, and sometimes it'd be his footwork, or sometimes it'd just be his nastiness, and other times he's bending at the waist and he's reaching and he's falling and his balance looks poor. He had a lot of Jake Fisher reps to him, which high upside, low downside, and it makes you wonder, where is he going to go in the draft, and is he somebody that with the right coaching you're going to get a lot more out of him. And then I think on the other team, because that's all from the North team, and there's no surprise North dominated in that game, but the South team had two tackles that kept standing out also, and it was Andre Dillard from Washington State and Titus Howard of Alabama State. As we're there, we're hearing, people put Dillard in round one discussion as the top tackle, and he was okay. He was good. The one highlight might be that you see, and I think it was Dillard. I can't remember now if it was Dillard or Howard, John, that Sweat just bull rushed and manhandled.
That was Howard, I think.
That was Howard? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
But and so Dillard, he played with more wide hands and had a good base, but a lot of people to get into him. I think he needed to get stronger. You can see he was a little slow to react at times, but when he did anchor and mirror and able to sit down, he looked really good. And there was times that people couldn't beat him because he just had good agility and a good balance and base to him, where I think Howard was more of an athlete. I think he was a former tight end, and you could see his feet move, and he was just you couldn't get around him around the arc. The play where Howard gets bull rushed, he lets Sweat get into his inside left shoulder and really just push him to the ground. But the play before that, because they were going 2 reps against each other, play before that, Sweat tries to go around the outside, and Howard knocks his inside hand down, gets one hand on the shoulder, one hand on the hip, and just drives him around the arc and into the ground. And it was really like, okay, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want to see. So he had a lot of plays coming from a small school where I'm like, he may be a future starter and maybe a future, good starter. So I came away from this practice really hopeful for this O-line and thinking maybe the Bengals don't have to attack one at 11 because I really like this second and third group.
I just want to add in real quick. I think Dillard looks like a Boyhe, but he has more positive traits that you can work with, and you can kind of take that with what you want. I don't know where you draft that, but it's like the best evaluation I can give to him at this point.
Yeah, definitely saw some good things. I feel like in these games you don't normally see that. I feel like the O-line tends to struggle. People always like to talk about the cohesiveness of a line and how they communicate, and obviously there's a lot to that with putting in a system. But yeah, it really seemed like that there wasn't much of a problem for that with this group. So definitely some guys that looked really strong there. Flipping into the other side on the defensive line. Obviously, Montez Sweat was a big guy that was talked about coming into it and through practice. Joe, who's standing out to you in that group?
Yeah, and I mentioned Kalen Saunders just a minute ago, and he had a great game too. I think on the first drive or maybe the second drive, he got a sack, and then I think it was a swim move, then comes back on a spin move. which shows his athleticism. He's a guy who you probably heard the reports say he was having a child, and his fiance or wife, I can't remember, his lady told him to stay there and get the practice time in, and then he did backflips after the baby was born. So he's an athlete, but he's 6'1", 300, and I think he might have been 310, but he's powerful because of that size, because of that natural leverage, man. He really plays low, plays strong. He disrupted a lot of run plays just as much as he was a disruptive pass rusher. And I think I came away from him thinking, that maybe he's a first-round guy. Maybe someone likes him at the end of the first round. And if that's the case, man, he made the good decisions and probably not see his child be born and wait 3 or 4 days to go see him for the first time. But because that's a lot of money if he really moved up boards that far. I don't know where he was coming in. And the other guy to me at defensive tackle, especially that we kept focusing on because he's just a big, powerful guy. It's Renell Wren out of Arizona State, and he's 6'4", 315, played nose tackle there. He's almost got 34-inch arms, and he played kind of a shaded nose in practices, and he really gave Bradbury struggles just with that length and power. And he was the only guy really to give Bradbury issues. And sometimes it was just a stalemate in the middle there where both guys just hit each other. And sometimes that's a win for the defense, especially at nose tackle. And he did that a lot. But I also thought he showed a swim move and some pass rush ability. So he looks like a nose tackle type that can move and offer you a little bit in the passing game. I thought at the same time, though, once practices rolled into day 2, day 3, they kind of trap block him a little bit and invited him upfield just to get him out of the way, and they'd run off his backside. And so that's something to be aware of going forward. If that's something, if he's over aggressive and teams are going to attack that, it'll be something he'll need to fix. But the D-line group, I think everyone flashed a little bit, and it all depended on probably who they're going against in matchups. If you're an athletic guy and you're going against a guy that's heavy-footed, you should look good. But to me, the other guy that's consistently won was Kingsley Keke from Texas A&M, and there's another defensive tackle that's maybe 6'2.5", 286, I think he measured in, with 34.5-inch arms, so there's another length. But he was stouter than I expected at 286. A lot of their run drills and run blocks, I thought he played low, played strong, and was able to anchor and hold his position. But he's an athlete, and his swim moves, his spin moves, he consistently gave guys issues on the second phase. It wasn't the first initial I'm beating them. It was, okay, I've got a counter for you and I can work off of. And for me, when a young guy has that already, I'm going to write him down and really pay attention to him going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Some good guys in that group. I think it's interesting. Last year we had a defensive tackle, and this is not a comp at all, but in Nathan Shepard, who was a taller guy, but he was a guy that played D2 ball and really showed that he could step up against NFL competition. And this year we got Saunders coming out of the FCS in the Missouri Valley there. So definitely it's interesting seeing some of these bigger guys that they're big and strong at their level, and they can step up and do well against some of these higher level BCS level opponents too. So definitely interesting to see there. John, what do you think of the defensive line group?
The one guy that I'm interested in finding out more is Greg Gaines from Washington. He's number 98, and I think the first thing that stuck out with him was his hand usage, and it looked like that he had like 1 or 2, 3 or 4 moves that he could pop off at a moment's notice, and he can get around the guard and create some easy penetration. But he also looked a little bit wild at times with that, so I think he has a process in his mind, but it just needs to be more refined. But he would end up scraping over the backside, stacking, shedding, tracking down some backside runs and team drills. So I think he popped off. I want to see how he tests. I'd like to research more about his production and what he did at Washington, but he's a guy I think that we need to watch looking forward. Some guys on the edge, obviously Montez Sweat was popping off that first day, and just looking at him up close, he kind of reminded me of how he kind of attacks the edge and Spiros in the similar way to a guy like Carlos Dunlap, where he kind of attacks you with the length first and then pops off with a little rip move. And I know a lot of people aren't excited about his bend, and thinks he kind of lacks it. But I think that his hands and the way that he can kind of dip his hips a little bit, I think that's going to help him out into the next level. And I think he obviously helped himself a lot maybe even more than a lot of the other guys down there. Joe mentioned Kingsley Keke. I thought that his former teammate at Texas A&M and Dalen Max showed some positive traits as well. He's like 330 compared to Keke's 286. It was a little bit he's not as long, but I do think that he definitely shows a lot of pop with the bull rush. He can take a guard back as well. And the last guy on day 2 and 3, the Old Dominion dude, what's his name? O'Shane Eximides, I think is his name. He's 6'3", 240, 33.5-inch arms. I think he attacks the edge extremely well and can pop off with an inside counter. He was extremely productive at Old Dominion, and those guys are usually, the small school guys are usually the ones who get called to the Senior Bowl when they're extremely productive. And I think he's going to find his name called somewhere in the middle rounds of the NFL draft, depending on where he tests. But I definitely think that he has the hand usage to work against, NFL caliber offensive tackles early in his career. So definitely a very deep group on the defensive line as well. We didn't get a chance to see Josh Allen, but I think we came away with more positives than negatives with this defensive line group.
Yeah, definitely some good ones in there. And I think you're seeing them against real good competition with that O-line too. So I think I kind of had to temper myself a little bit where I was like, man, they're not especially watching the game live, like, they're not doing that much. But
not
very good.
North, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Very good O-line group they were seeing there too. So, all right. Anything we missed on? Any overall takeaways you guys wanted to swing back to?
There was one Texas defensive end that stood out a bunch. Charles Emenihu, I believe it is, 6'6", 275. He stood out against the run consistently. Him and Edoga at tackle USC were just having length battles the entire time, and I thought he had a lot of run plays, and there was a couple pass rushes where I'm like, okay, but he may be a guy that don't be surprised if, I don't know where he's going to go, but if he's a mid-round pick that ends up being a solid rotation guy for a long time because of his run defense, then, that would be no surprise to me based on what we saw.
Yeah, for me,
I think
go ahead. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, those big, long guys, sometimes, if they don't have great bend, like they can give you a lot there on the edge. So that's definitely, there's definitely, but how much value is there to something that doesn't involve the pass game? It's the big question, I think.
Of course.
All right, John?
Yeah, I think Elgin Jenkins, the center out of Mississippi State, I think he was the starting center for the other team that Bradbury wasn't on. But I thought where Bradbury kind of faltered a little bit in pass protection, I think that's where Jenkins kind of shined. I think he has a much more stout anchor to his lower half, and I think he's got a lot more drive in his lower half as well, where he can stifle some of those bull rushes, but he also wins with inside hands. So that combination can be deadly. Obviously, going up against SEC competition for as long as he did, he had a lot of experience, but he's a guy that I think that, any team looking for, center depth should be very interested in, because I think he has that kind of natural power that is kind of rare for guys that young, and he also has a little bit of length to go with it. He's not going to have the upside to kind of get those reach blocks that Bradbury does, but I think where Bradbury has his faults, I think is where Jenkins kind of shines a little bit, and he showed some of that this week.
All right, awesome. So John, tell everybody what you got going on, where they can find your work, where they can follow you.
Yeah, so I'll be editing articles that Matt writes on Cincy Jungle, and I'm
making me look good.
On Twitter at John_Sheeran.
All right, awesome. Joe, how about you?
I write for The Athletic, and I will continue that, and you should subscribe because it's how I get paid. But no, you can follow me at Joe Goodberry on Twitter. It's the best way to contact me or reach me because I'm on there too much.
All right, yeah, and the Athletic worth the subscription for your work alone, but there's definitely some other good stuff on there too. So, and I am on Cincy Jungle as well, and you can find me here on the Grueling Truth Radio Network during draft season with the best available draft podcast. We'll have an episode coming out in a day or so with South Dakota State cornerback Jordan Brown, fresh off of the Senior Bowl and getting ready for the Combine. I'll be having a one-on-one conversation with him. That'll be coming out soon. So make sure you subscribe and follow the Grueling Truth Radio Network for that update and for everything else. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will catch you next time.